Just going to make sure that you can see my slides correctly. So hopefully you can see the first slide without any notes or anything like that.
We can see it clearly.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Henny Thompson, and I've been working at Taylor & Francis for 6 years. I currently manage the Plant Science Journals portfolio. And today I'm going to talk to you through why publishing matters, how to choose a journal, what to think about when you're writing, some of the steps to submission, the peer review process, and what to do when you're published. I do come from a background of scientific journals, but I will hopefully give some advice. So whatever subject you're working in, you can find some useful information here. So we will start with the big picture, which is why publish at all. There are a number of reasons why an academic, a student, or a practitioner may decide to publish in a peer-reviewed journal. It's a forum to exchange ideas and methodologies. You can build a reputation as an expert in the field, and you can disseminate your work on a global scale. Generally, published research will add something new to an existing debate or start a new conversation about a new emerging topic. It may suggest a solution to a problem or announce a development or a discovery. And of course, publishing in a peer-reviewed journal is a necessary step in the research process and often a requirement for researchers to progress their career. The first crucial step in the research and publishing process is understanding what you are doing, why, and who you would like to communicate with. Making clear decisions and having a strategy at the beginning will improve your chances of being published in an international journal. It all starts with choosing a topic that will be relevant to the international community. This means keeping up with the current literature, what key scholars are working on, and attending conferences in person and online as much as possible. The main question you should ask yourself is, who outside of my immediate network would be interested in this research paper? Another of the challenges authors have, especially those who are just starting out, is communicating research findings in a manner that is accessible and in line with how most researchers in the field present research. In fact, one of the main reasons an article may be rejected is that the peer reviewers and journal editors determine that it is not what they are looking for as a journal article. So what do they mean by this? It could be that what has been submitted to the journal is more similar to a condensed thesis or a book chapter. So the research tries to cover too many different points, it doesn't have the structure of a journal article, or it is too journalistic, which is more of an example of public scholarship. So basically, the piece of writing is not a research article in terms of structure or language, or possibly both. So before you begin investigating journal options for your work, it's essential to spend time understanding your project and the audience you would like to reach. Throughout your career, you will likely be involved in many types of research, which will lead you to produce a variety of content. Typically, people focus on the research article, but you may also publish a review article, a position piece, a case study, a book review, data notes, genome announcements, or even a new species announcement. And sometimes your work will be written for specialists in your field, but you may also choose to engage in scholarship writing for the general public. And sometimes it will be for a local audience, and sometimes you will hope to reach an international audience. So it's really important to take the time at the beginning to determine your objectives. It's also important to understand what is expected of you and what the requirements are in your current position. So are you required to publish a certain number of research articles? Or is the expectation that you will write a book and then turn various chapters into articles in the coming years? Is there an expectation that you will collaborate with your advisor and be a co-author? If so, what does that mean for you? So once you have determined your objectives and really understand what is being required of you, then you can start beginning to consider where you want to publish. And when you begin to find the appropriate place to publish, remember that you are joining an ongoing conversation in your field. So make sure that what you're contributing is a thoughtful contribution to that ongoing conversation. Choosing a journal that is not a good fit for your work can slow down the publishing process. So it is important to take this part of the process seriously and be thoughtful about your journal choice. It can be difficult to know where to begin when looking for a potential journal to publish in. Obviously, the first step is to read a lot and get a sense of the published research and the journal options in your particular field. During your studies, you likely read articles published by many different journals in the field, and some of your peers and mentors may have publishing experience and share their insights with you. Talk to your network of colleagues and those who know your work and ask for journal recommendations. If they have published in those journals, ask them about their experience and see if they have any advice to offer about the process. Academics and researchers are assessed using different criteria depending on the institution and sometimes the particular field. Take the time to understand how you will be assessed in terms of publications. Do you need to publish a certain number of articles each year? Are there particular journals that you need to publish in? Is there a ranking system for journals where you may receive more points for publishing in one journal as opposed to another? And do you need to publish your works open access? The answers to these questions will likely be different for each one of you, and whatever criteria you need to meet, make sure that you take it into consideration when you're selecting journals to submit your work to. There are other methods of identifying journals to publish in. So at Taylor & Francis, we do have a journal suggester tool that will help you identify potential journals to publish your work in. There is also a list of current calls for papers on this site where you can refine by your subject area and see which journals are seeking submissions for themed article collections. Now, publishing in a special issue can mean that your paper receives more promotion and reaches a wider audience of interested readers. Other publishers have similar tools to help promote research that they're looking for in particular areas. Now, once you've identified a list of journals that might be a good fit for your work, carefully read the aims and scope statements. Aims and scope are designed to give librarians, students, researchers, and of course, potential authors a clear understanding of what the journal is about and the type of research they are interested in publishing. First, we have an example of the Journal of Plant Interactions. So this is an international open access journal covering all topics relating to plant interactions. The journal hopes to be a venue for scientists across disciplines, including mycology, ecology, and agronomy. So it is quite broad. They do highlight some specific requirements. They only want specific article types to be submitted. They emphasize that they only publish in English and that the journal operates a double-blind peer review process. We'll come on to that a bit later on in the talk. And of course, this journal is only accepting papers that will go on to be published fully open access. So next, we have another example, and this is from the journal All Life. So this is what we call a generalist journal that covers a broad subject matter across the discipline of life sciences. It's a very broad scope. This journal is asking for multidisciplinary, reproducible research. It is also looking for international research that is open access. And it makes a point of indicating that they are looking for research that supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So if your work in any way relates to those goals, then this might be a good venue to really highlight that. And the final example I have today is another plant science journal, this time focusing on a much narrower topic of plant communication. This journal specifically asks for new and original research only, but they do accept a wider range of article types than the previous examples, including short communications and reports. And this journal operates using a single-blind peer review policy. Again, we'll come on to that a bit later. So with these examples, we can see that the value in assessing the aims and scope, even when the journals fall into the same subject category. Along with the aims and scope statements, it's a good idea to look at what has been published in the journal in the past 3 to 5 years and ask yourself, does my research fit in this journal? And if you find research similar to yours, you could consider referencing it. Remember, you are joining an ongoing conversation in your field and in the journal. Next, you could review the editorial board of the journal, which will give you a sense of what kind of research they are interested in publishing. And if they are interested in publishing in a particular area, they will try to appoint someone to the editorial board who is a specialist in that area to help as an ambassador and to help with the peer review process. The same is true with geography. If a journal is interested in receiving research from a specific country, they will try to appoint someone who is based there that will help increase the submissions of articles from these institutions. And finally, review the journal metrics page. This is often where authors go first. I wouldn't recommend going there first, and I'll come on to why. But this page contains crucial information about the number of annual downloads the journal receives, the average speed of peer review, and the time it takes when a paper gets accepted to when it becomes published online. It also includes rankings such as the journal impact factor, the Scopus site score, and other indexing metrics, which may be important depending on the criteria of your institution. So these metrics can be used as part of the judging criteria for choosing a journal, but they should only be one factor rather than the main factor. The overriding question in your mind should be, is this journal a good fit for my research? And is this the audience I want to be reaching? So today we're going to focus a bit on open access because many of you may be interested, or in some cases you may be required to publish your work open access. I'm going to go quickly over some of the elements of open access for those of you who are unfamiliar. There are 2 essential elements. The first is that making content freely available online to read. And the second is making content reusable by a third party. You will hear many terms used when discussing open access, such as green, diamond, bronze, but today I will just discuss gold, which is the most common. Gold open access entails making the PDF or the version of record, the published article, freely available online. There are 2 ways that an author can publish open access with Taylor & Francis and with many other publishers as well. So you can either choose to publish in a fully open access journal or a hybrid journal. Fully open access journals publish all of their content OA. These journals have no subscriptions. Instead, most charge an article publishing charge or an APC. However, many journals are funded by societies or institutional agreements, and in this case, either the author does not have to pay or they may pay a reduced fee. The second option for publishing your work is to publish in a hybrid journal, which is when an author chooses to publish open access in a journal that publishes subscription or paywall content. So these journals charge an APC to cover the costs for the open access article. However, many institutions and consortia, a growing number in fact, have agreements with the publishers which cover the APCs for hybrid journals. There are lots of benefits to publishing open access, including increased discoverability, which means that anybody can read and cite your work. You can reach beyond academia. Because it is free to view, it can be easily accessed by people outside of your research field and outside the scholarly community. 3, you can highlight your work by sharing and posting your final published article anywhere. And finally, ownership. You retain the copyright to your work with an open access article. Taylor and Francis offer a range of waivers and discounts for article publishing charges. And as I mentioned, we have many open access agreements with different universities and institutions. Authors from certain countries can benefit from a 50% or 100% discount. And some journals, which are owned by societies, offer a member discount. So it's always worth checking that out. Often joining a society for a student is very reasonable, so this can be a really good option. Information on the exact pricing for your particular choice of journal and article type, because they do have different prices, can be found on our author services website. And the open access cost finder has up-to-date information on licensing options, the embargo periods, and pricing. Next, I want to talk about fraud and malpractice in publishing and give you some pointers on how to spot this. In recent years, we have seen the rise of fraudulent activity on the part of organizations claiming to provide services to researchers. So many, if not all of you, will be aware of predatory publishers. These entities present themselves as legitimate, as publishers, as editors, and as journals. And they will inundate your email inboxes with invitations to publish your articles with them. Predatory publishers can be spotted as they have many characteristics in common. Their websites contain incorrect or misleading information. For instance, they will copy well-known journals' names and website design with some small differences, such as a slight difference in the journal title. The editorial board will feature names of well-established researchers who never agreed to be on the board. They also promise very fast peer review and publishing times, for example, promising publication within a week. So the thing that's crucial here is that the peer review process often does not happen, or it is fabricated. Lastly, they often have confusing or unclear information about fees. So some of these things can help identify predatory publishers and conferences. The other trend we're seeing is predatory services for authors. So these entities set up professional looking websites offering a number of services. They will often offer to format your paper in the style of a journal, and then they offer to take care of the submission for you. So what we have found is that the websites look professional, but if you look closer, the language doesn't actually make sense. We have been contacted by a number of authors who were told that their papers had been submitted to a journal by one of these services, and that they had participated in what they thought was a legitimate peer review process and had their paper accepted. However, we had never seen these papers. The editors of the journals had never received these papers, they had never put them through peer review, and they had never accepted them. The authors had received a fake but official-looking communication from what they thought was our editor and the production department. The main point here is that you should always submit your article yourself and never let anyone else do it for you unless it's one of your co-authors. Needless to say, those poor authors never had their paper published in the journal that they thought they would. Despite these bad actors, there are resources to help you make good decisions about where you would like to publish. For instance, a key resource is called Think, Check, Submit, which is a cross-industry initiative which helps researchers make informed choices and choose trusted journals to publish their research in. The DOAJ is a database for fully open access journals, and the journals in this database have been screened to ensure that they are legitimate. And finally, OASPA, OASPA, is an organization for publishers working with open access. Members of this organization must meet certain standards to be included. If the journal you are considering publishing in is not included in the DOAJ, or their publisher is not a member of OASPA, then you should proceed with extreme caution. We don't have time for a full writing workshop today, but here are some basic tips to help make your argument easy to read and understand. To gain a good understanding about how to communicate your research, I suggest that you read. The absolute best thing you can do to become a great writer is to read other great writers in your field. See how they structure their papers and arguments, how they present their data, and then see if you can model your paper structure after theirs. If at all possible, write your paper first and edit it later. This will help you create a through line in your paper, or a line that will hold all of the different parts together and make it coherent. Keep it simple. Could you explain your paper to your friend or relative in a few sentences? Whilst of course you'll be working with complex ideas, this does not mean that you should use overly complicated jargon or acronyms without explaining what they mean. A good idea is to remember the structure IMRAD, which is introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion, which will help make the research easy to follow. Make sure that you are citing your sources throughout so that you don't forget to put them in at the end. And if there are several people adding different sections to the paper, then make sure that you have agreed the order that you will all appear in the author list, and check to see that the voice remains consistent throughout if there are multiple people writing different bits. Apart from the actual paper itself, another very important element is the abstract. Like the introduction, the abstract is often the first thing that an editor or peer reviewer will look at to assess whether an article is of interest. So it's essential that you do spend a good deal of time writing and refining your abstract. It's difficult to write a decent abstract before you actually finish the paper, because the abstract is meant to be an overview of the content. So make sure that you know the parameters for the particular journal you are submitting to, because most have word counts and perhaps guidance on format or structure. Think about who your potential audience is and write it for them. So if your research would be useful for policymakers and you really want to make sure that they understand it, then you could consider adding some bullet points with key policy highlights, such as the example I've shown on the screen. And after you've written your first draft, go through and remove unnecessary words and make sure that you are focusing on the essential information. And of course, if you end up revising your paper after you have written your abstract, then make sure to review and revise the abstract as well. It's very easy to forget. So as a takeaway, here are some very quick do's and don'ts when you are writing your paper. So firstly, look at published papers, fit the aims and scope, format your article to the journal, know who you're submitting it to, check spelling and grammar, consider sending to a colleague if your English isn't fluent, and make sure that you get colleagues to read it before you submit. Your title and your abstract are your article's shop window, so make it attractive. Put what is new or what makes your research different at the beginning, and make sure that you use keywords in your title and abstract to make your article more discoverable. Use clear, concise language, and draw out the main issues that you're looking to address in both the title and the abstract. So prior to submitting your work, it is really important to read and follow the instructions for authors, because every journal has what we call an instructions for authors page, and that's across publishers as well. This is the Taylor and Francis one. And these are essentially rule books for the journal. So here you can find information about article publishing charges and waivers, information about the peer review process, the types of articles they accept, word limits, reporting guidelines, especially for medical titles, information about preparing your manuscript, such as formatting and referencing styles, and there will be information about sharing data and other relevant information about the process, such as similarity checks, which will be conducted upon submission. So I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of the ethical issues that we see on a regular basis. Issues around publishing ethics are seemingly on the rise, or perhaps we're just getting better at identifying where things have been breached. So here are some of the issues that we see on a regular basis. Issues around authorship, competing interests, duplicate submission, data or image fabrication, plagiarism or text recycling, peer review manipulation, and breaches of copyright. So we could easily have a full session just on publishing ethics today, but I'm just going to focus on 3 of the most common issues that we deal with. That's authorship, duplicate submission, and plagiarism. It's important to remember that lots of these cases happen when authors make a genuine mistake. So make sure that you're aware of the rules so that you don't fall foul of them. Authorship issues are quite common and they slow down the peer review and production process. Often the issues have to do with disagreements over who is included on the author line or the sequence of names and who is responsible for different parts of the process. To avoid any problems, it is extremely important that you have written agreement between all the authors regarding responsibilities, the order of the names, and which journal you're submitting to. Apart from standard authorship disputes, we also have 3 distinct issues that we see. So firstly, ghost authorship, which is where a significant contribution to a manuscript has been made without acknowledgement of that contribution, essentially missing an author off the list. This is an issue because we cannot know if there is a conflict of interest with this author, and of course, we want all authors to be acknowledged appropriately. On the other side of the coin, we have guest authorship, which is where authorship is granted to an individual who does not meet the standards for authorship, but maybe because of his or her seniority, her reputation, or influence. So this is quite common practice in some institutions, but of course, anybody who is listed as an author should have made a significant contribution to the paper, as they will be held responsible for it in the future. And finally, authorship for sale, it sounds as it is, and there have been a number of cases where individuals, predatory publishers or paper mills offer to add an author's name after a paper has been accepted for a price. So these actors prey on the desperation of scholars who are under a lot of pressure to publish, to progress in their careers. But you must remember that any listed author is a representative of the paper, and they should have in-depth knowledge about all aspects of the study. Make sure that you have agreed the final list of authors before you submit. It is not permitted to remove or add authors after submission unless we have received written agreement from all parties. If you are writing with 1 or more other people, you will need to decide in advance who will be the named corresponding author, because they are responsible for signing the copyright licenses and responding to peer review and production staff. The second common mistake is duplicate submission. So whether or not you know, it's absolutely not allowed to submit to more than 1 journal at a time. This is to make sure that we don't have cases where papers are accepted by 2 journals and then go on to be duplicate publications. The only exceptions are where it is a translation of an original article in another language, where data has been presented at a conference, or where a paper has been posted in a preprint server, such as bioRxiv or medRxiv. But do remember that if you have posted a preprint, if your paper goes on to be accepted, you will need to amend the preprint and make sure that it links to the final published article. And finally, originality issues, which are becoming easier to detect because most journals use software to measure incidences of overlap. And I'm sure that during your student or research career, you have had to use this kind of software with examinations and essays as well. So, of course, most of you will know that if you use someone else's ideas, you need to clearly cite them in the paper and provide a full reference to their work. This is true of all content, including websites, blogs, and your own work, because it will all show up on an originality check. However, there is a related issue called text recycling, or sometimes known as salami slicing. So this is where you use the same ideas, data, or words to the point that it is not offering any new insights or contributing anything new to the field. So that could be where you are using different bits of your thesis and publishing it in multiple papers, where to a point where it is no longer deemed valid publication. Anything you publish should be original content and pushing the research field forward. So that brings me on to the quality control aspect of scientific publishing or peer-reviewed publishing, which is the peer review process. So this quote is from Andrew Preston, who runs Publons. Some of you may have come across Publons. It's a database where reviewers can list the reviews that they've done for different journals and be rated as reviewers. And the quote really captures the importance of the peer review process. So it's not just about quality control and vetting some of the issues that we've just discussed, but also collaboration between researchers and a really essential part of the process to improve the research that goes on to be published. There is a lot of discussion around peer review and the different types of peer review models. So I've just put the 3 most commonly referenced peer review definitions up on the screen. The majority of Taylor and Francis journals, and indeed most journals, use single anonymous or single blind reviews, which is where the reviewers can see who the author is, but the author doesn't know who the reviewer is. Double blind or double anonymous is where neither the reviewer nor the author know who each other are. And then there are new emerging definitions for open peer review, some of which include peer review reports being published or just the peer review names being published. And very commonly, the reviewers and authors know who each other are. So no matter which form of peer review the journal you submit to is using, it is a collaborative process where authors get feedback from their peers to improve research and engage in a dialogue with other people within the field. As well as being reviewed yourself when you submit, do consider being a reviewer yourself. So if you're a researcher, a junior researcher, you can speak to your supervisor or get in touch directly with a journal editor to offer your services as a peer reviewer. This can really help you understand the review process, improve your own writing, and build networks with other people in your field. So this flowchart is an overview of how peer review works in most cases. Firstly, your manuscript is submitted to the journal and goes through a check to see if everything is in order. If it is not formatted correctly, or there are missing files or other components, it will be returned to you with instructions to update and resubmit. Once the files are all in order, the submission is sent to the editor for a quick review. The editor will decide if the paper should be sent out to peer review. At this stage, it can be rejected if it is out of scope of the journal, if it is not readable, or if it is not understandable. This is called a desk reject. If the paper is of interest to the journal, then the editor will send it out for peer review, usually to 2 or more external reviewers who are specialists in the particular field. They will read the work and provide a written report for the editor with recommendations for a decision. The most common recommendations are revise and resubmit with major revisions or with minor revisions. This means that they are interested in your work, but have some suggestions on how you can make it better. Your paper can also be rejected at this point. It is possible that your paper will be accepted without revisions, but it is very, very unlikely because every piece of writing can be improved upon. Once you make the revisions, you will resubmit to the editor, who will either accept it or send it out again to the reviewers to see if they are happy or have further comments. Now, here's the bad news. Your paper can go through this process a couple of times and still be rejected. I'll tell you how to avoid this in a moment. Responding to the reviewer's comments is an important process on your way to being published. At times, when you receive the reviewer reports, it can feel like a rejection, especially with a revise and resubmit with major revisions decision. Try not to become upset. Maybe close your computer and forget about it for a couple of days. Sorry. When you are ready to get to work, carefully read the decision letter. It may include advice on how to respond to the reviewer comments and will provide information about deadlines for returning your revisions. If you have co-authors, you could set up a meeting to review all of the comments and make sure that you share the reports with everybody prior to your meeting. Whether you have co-authors or not, carefully go through the report and make a list with all of the suggestions for improvement. You may want to group the comments based on category, but go through the list and decide which recommendations you would like to adopt and make those changes. If the peer reviewer has misunderstood something, then review your explanation for them. Now, here is the key to avoiding the fate of going through the revisions process and still being rejected. When you send back your revisions, you must include a note to the editor clearly detailing how you have addressed the peer reviewer's concerns. Where you have adopted the peer reviewer's recommendation, clearly detail what you have changed and where that change can be located in the paper. Some journals will welcome the use of tracked changes to help editors and peer reviewers see what you have done. Now, you will not agree with all of the peer reviewers' recommendations. In that case, you need to clearly and respectfully explain why you chose not to amend your paper and be specific. Once you have detailed how you have addressed each of the peer reviewers' comments, review your response to the editor to make sure that you have included all of the recommendations and the actions you have taken, that you have done so in a clear manner, and that the letter is professional and devoid of any frustration, regardless of how you're actually feeling. It can be a challenging process, so it is understandable that you may be a bit frustrated, but it is important that that does not influence your communication with the editor. Most importantly, remember to be respectful and professional. This is your community and your future network. You may end up submitting to the same journal again. You may be asked to peer review articles. You may want to become a board member one day, or you may have dreams of collaborating with the individuals who are currently reviewing your paper. So keep this in mind during the process. And remember, the peer reviewers are trying to help you publish the very best version of your work. So here are the top 5 reasons for rejection. As I mentioned, desk rejects are often because a paper is out of scope for the journal. So really remember to carefully read the aims and scope of the journal and look at what has been previously published. As I mentioned before, looking at the instructions for authors will give you the word counts for particular article types. A lot of papers are rejected because they are too long or too short. They have poor style, grammar, and punctuation. No contribution to the subject often means that they don't feel it is original enough or furthers the conversation, but it may well be appropriate for a different journal. And of course, some people send the wrong article types. So sending a research article to a journal which only accepts reviews, no matter how good that article is, it will not be accepted in that journal. So So if you get through all of this and your paper is accepted, congratulations, it's a long process. And once you think that you have been published, it can be easy to think that the job is done. But there are some easy ways to make sure that people see, cite, and use your research now that the hard work of publishing is over. So here are some tips to maximize the potential of your article to be seen, read, and cited. Tried and tested by many authors, and we see the impact in terms of downloads every single day. So post updates and link your article on academic and professional networking sites. Use social media to post a link to your article. Add a brief summary and link to your article on your department website if you have a profile page. And if you think that your research is newsworthy, then speak to your institution's press office and provide them with a link to your article. And make sure to include the institution or publisher in your social media posts. If you're a blogger or you have a personal web page, then write about your article and link to it. And make sure that you are writing about your post on social media as well and linking to the article. These can feel like unnecessary extras, but they really do help get your research out there. And once you've gone through all the work of getting it published, you do really want people to actually see it. Lastly, I'd like to highlight a few resources for you to explore further. The first is our Author Services website, which offers support, guidance, and tips on copyright, ethics, choosing a journal. There's a pre-submission checklist and a social media guide for researchers, as well as much more information besides. And there are also links out from that site to information about editing services and other pre-submission formatting services which we offer to authors. So I'd like to say thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions in the chat, or you can talk to me.
Thank you, Henny. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sure you will be able to talk so much longer and give so many more advice and tips on writing, especially. But thanks, I think we touched on many very different elements of the publishing process, and I think it was very useful. But yes, let's move on to the questions. We received a few questions through the chat box, so I'm going to go through them now. And I would like to also invite those who want to send us a message and talk to Henny directly. If you prefer to have a more natural way of asking your own question, you can just send us a message, make us notice you so we can unmute you and you can show your face and talk directly. So let me start from the questions we already received. Okay, we have a person that is probably working a researcher but in a non-academic field. So this person is asking, do we always need to have academic affiliation in a journal? And how does it work if I work in a non-academic field but still I carry out research and publish papers? This is the first question.
Thank you for the question. Most journals do not discriminate on whether you are coming from an academic institution or whether you are a private researcher or indeed a practitioner. And there are lots of journals which focus more on applied research where their audience may be primarily practitioners. So yeah, that shouldn't be a problem.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to the second. This person is saying, I have spoken to some people that makes me feel that they needed to include in their authors list some people who did not make significant contribution. So, and he's saying not doing so might have consequences. So, and there are often no repercussions for doing so. So basically, he's asking if there's any advice you can give. Did I ask my question well? Sorry, maybe I wasn't I
No,
wasn't super clear. Okay.
I think I understood. Hopefully that's what the questioner was asking. That's a really difficult conversation because obviously my answer is that people who have not contributed and fulfilled the author criteria should not be listed as authors on a paper. We do have editorial policies available on the Author Services website where there are, I think, 4 key criteria which define authorship. And so it might be worth, before submitting, just writing each person's name and then making sure that they fulfill each of those 4 criteria. And if they don't, then consider adding them to an acknowledgements section. I do understand it is difficult when there is pressure to have certain people named on your paper, but that certainly isn't something that I would support based on the authorship criteria. Being an author is quite a big responsibility, and so it is really important that only people who are actually contributors to the paper are listed as authors.
Thank you. That's good advice. If you, I'm sure these situations might make you feel very uncomfortable, but yeah, maybe it's a good advice to just refer them to the criteria of the journal, and you know, that might make you know, the situation easier. There's another question that someone in the audience already replied to, but I would like just to quickly bring it to you. Can data that have been presented during a conference be published in a journal later?
Yes, they can. Of course, if you have presented a poster or given a talk, then that should be cited in the references. But absolutely, often presenting at a conference can be a really good way to sort of make an argument in the round that you will then go on to publish in a journal. And often abstracts or conference presentations are collected by particular journals to be published later. So yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Good luck.
And okay, very concrete question. This person is saying, if the scholar I need to quote published in Chinese only and not in English yet, what should I do? Is it better that I use my own English translation when quoting his work, or is it better that I note like the Chinese original text? Yeah, like I refer to his original text and then I add the translation.
Oh, that is a brilliant question. So is this, sorry, could you just say the beginning of that question again?
Yeah, I think the question is this person wants to cite someone's work, which is in Chinese. So this person is asking, should I just, you know, translate it in English by myself so I can quote, you know, my English translation, or should I quote the Chinese and then of course add a translation because his paper is in English?
I don't know the answer to that directly, but I would assume that, and I would look that up, but I would assume you would need to cite the original and then provide a translation for that. That is what I would do, but I think it's probably worth double checking on that one. That's a good question.
Yeah, that was a very good question. So yeah, we will also try to find an answer.
Yeah, I'll try and find that out for you after this call.
We learn every day, right?
Yeah.
And look, we also received quite a few comments that I thought were very interesting on publishers, like fake publishers. So we have Florian with us who made these comments. Since some of the audience might have missed through the chat, I would like to invite Florian, if he's following still, to just maybe speak directly and to make his comments. Let me find him in the chat so I can unmute him. Florian, you should be ready to go if you like.
Okay. So I'm relatively experienced in terms of publishing, and basically ever since I had the first time my email published, I'm getting advertisements for such predatory publishers, and I've found some general ways how to identify those emails. The first one is that effectively a good journal doesn't ask you for submission in almost all cases, and especially usually doesn't ask you with a personal addressing. So if they put your name in the subject, then you can be pretty sure you can delete that email. The second thing is very often the journals try to stress in which databases they're listed. And as soon as you see anything except for Web of Science or JCRs or journal citation reports, you can pretty much assume the journal isn't good. That's of course for science journals. I'm in science and engineering, not in humanities, where the situation is a little different. When you get an email from anybody who's not using an institutional email address, so professional email address. So for example, if you get an email from Gmail or something like that, you can be pretty sure it's not appropriate. Then they very often stress how professional they are. And well, if you read "We are American company" or something like this, then you know delete is the best action. And if they give you an address, especially an address with suite in it or only a fax number, then you also know it's pretty useless. If you are not sure, then check the ISSN and not only the title of the journal. For example, one of the first predatory journals I came across was Macromolecules an Indian journal. Of course, referring to Macromolecules, the famous ACS journal instead. Then, as a general thing, the longer the name, the more unprofessional the journal is in general. And if you see World Journal or International Journal, well, international not always, but world very often, just reports or case studies or so, then you'll be pretty sure it's nothing really useful. And one very common last thing I noticed about emails is that they simply take the first author's name and address you with that first author's name if you're the corresponding author of the paper. If that happens, I've never gotten an email from anybody where they did that, which didn't immediately fit the predatory journal or conference listing. So these are some simple things to check before you're actually trying to waste some time on responding to those predatory journal or conference emails. Thanks.
Thank you, Florian, and thank you, Henny. I hope you didn't mind. I thought Florian had the good comments, so I thought,
no,
okay,
they were brilliant
let him share.
And it's good to hear from somebody.
Quite a bit of experience with this. And Florian, I saw you also sent a question in the chat box. So since you're here with us, would you like just to ask it directly about plagiarism, right?
Yes, well, the problem is that I'm getting increasingly relatively high plagiarism count for papers, which I know that I'm writing myself, simply because the experimental part, in writing the experimental part of the journal, I'm running out of possibilities to write that without running into plagiarism. And the same thing is for description of especially spectroscopic data. So when I, for example, have FTIR data, then I mean, I have to say the band at such and such corresponds to this one. And because I'm not the first one using this material, I'm simply getting into plagiarism trouble with this. So what can be done to avoid getting in trouble with this? And the last thing which pops up as plagiarism is when you have technical terms consisting of several words which have to be spelled out that way. For example, when you say zero shear rate viscosity, that's 4 words, and then add a verb to it, and maybe the or a, and then you have enough to get a hit from the plagiarism counter. How do I avoid that I get in trouble with the publisher because of such things?
Well, my first question would be, have you had negative feedback from editors or from journals for these similarity checks?
Yes, exactly, because of such things.
Because normally when we use, as a publisher, when we have similarity check tools, they are quite a blunt tool, and they are definitely not meant to be 100% an answer, yes or no, for a paper. They should. So if I received a similarity report, I would look at it and see exactly what you were mentioning. Some of these sections are more likely to have a high rate of similarity because of the limited ways that you can say, we did this, and then this happened, for example, in a methods description. So normally you would expect to see a certain level of similarity for a scientific paper anyway. It's more a tool that then the editor could look at and think, oh no, that's fine. That level of similarity is fine. So I'm not sure which journal. I mean, if you want to contact me after this, then I'd be happy to look at it and see if there are particular people who perhaps are being too careful with the tool.
Well, it was not one of your journals. That's what I can say. And I think the problem is that sometimes this blunt tool, as you said, is simply used without further checking.
Yeah.
And the question is, what should I do in this case if that happens?
I don't actually have an answer for that right now. I can definitely talk to somebody who has been involved in rolling out the tool at Taylor and Francis and see if they have particular advice that I can give you.
I guess that's a very tricky situation to find yourself in. But thanks, Hani, for trying to find a solution, and possibly we can follow up on this and help out Florian.
It won't just be you, I think, is the answer. So it sounds like something that I should be raising in case it starts to filter through to more people.
Yes.
Well, I think this is something that will sooner or later happen to a lot of people. And the problem is when you get such an accusing email, then of course it's quite a bit of a shock. And so I think it's something that I hope that the audience will simply remember that can happen to anybody, and it's probably not your fault, unless of course you're doing it on purpose.
Yeah, so key also not being upset and try to find a constructive solution for everybody. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Florian. And we have a few more questions, so I'm gonna continue with them. Okay, next question was, is there any relationship between impact factor and the turnaround times? Does a journal with high impact factor mean high turnaround times?
No, there wouldn't be a correlation particularly. I mean, some high impact factor journals may have a very high turnaround time. Some may have a very long turnaround time. I don't think there's a correlation there. Similarly, there isn't a correlation between impact factor and acceptance rate. Just because a journal has a high acceptance rate doesn't mean that it has a high impact factor, and vice versa. They are metrics to be used in isolation, I think.
Okay.
But
So
of course,
don't
if your most important priority is that you have a fast turnaround time between submission and decision, then that would be the metric that you would look at first. But of course, these are
Okay.
always averages for the journal, not for individual papers.
Yeah, so look at them individually because they're not related. And next question, what is the importance of abstracting and indexing information of a journal? Does it affect the number of citations?
Yes, because if a journal is not indexed in a particular indexing database, then it will not be counted. Well, it will be, sorry, that's a lie, that's wrong. What I mean is, when this is very complicated. So with an impact factor, for example, what the calculators are doing is they're looking at citations from other journals within the database. So if a journal is not in a database, then citations from that journal to other journals will not be counted. So abstracting and indexing, I mean, it doesn't stop your paper from being cited, but it may stop those citations from counting towards an impact factor or other form of ranking. I don't know if that helps. Sorry, that was.
I mean, for me, like you provide a clear answer. But if there's any further question, just ask them in the chat box or ask to be unmuted. So it's gonna be more natural if your question wasn't answered. And okay, next question is about press release. Can you please elaborate on a press release? Is it still possible to publish the summary of our published paper with some modifications in a newspaper article? I'm not sure that this question is what are you able to reply to these questions, or maybe it's not your competences?
So is that a concern around sort of plagiarizing the journal article in a newspaper article? Is that the question, or is the question like how can you get?
I think the question is, am I allowed to do so? But if I'm mistaken, please just text in the chat box.
The answer is yes, you are allowed to. As long as the original paper is referenced, then, which it would be if you're writing a summary of it, then things like plain language summaries, like writing a blog post or writing a newspaper article would be allowed. What wouldn't be allowed is if you copied and pasted most of the article into a blog post. That wouldn't be allowed. But I mean, yeah, summarizing is normal practice.
Thank you. Yeah, I see this question was from Nita, and she's saying that yeah, that was her question and it was answered, so that's great. Let's move to another one. Well, I think we already talked about this because this person is asking, is it okay to have your supervisor as a first author, even if they contribute nothing to the article? Well, I think you already talked about this, and it would be no. Of course, the situation makes you feel uncomfortable, and we said that yeah, maybe an advice would be to, I don't know, present him with the criteria of the journals for the authors.
I think it does depend what role they played. As a supervisor, you would expect them to have some sort of input and oversight over the research, and so it may well be that they fulfill the author criteria. I wouldn't want to say that they don't for sure, but I mean, yeah, it is important that you could maybe write a sentence about how each person fulfills each of the criteria for authorship. Yeah, but I can see the pressure there. And it is very common to include supervisors as authors on a paper, as co-authors, because often they, as I say, they have helped to structure the argument or provided useful data and oversight of the project. So in that case, they would be authors.
Okay, thank you. I hope this helps the person who is in this situation.
Trust me, it is difficult, and these problems do not stop once a paper has been published. I have several cases at the moment where people are disputing whether they should or shouldn't have been named on a paper. So please make sure that you get it in writing before you start to submit, because it doesn't disappear as soon as a paper is published.
Yeah, make sure you put it down in writing so nobody can change their
and
mind
agree
after.
so that nobody is upset.
Thank you.
And if you are acknowledging anybody, then make sure that you've told them that you're acknowledging them in a paper.
Yeah, make sure that everything is clear. Thank you. Next question. How long will be the decision process after I revise article and resubmit? I guess it depends.
It does depend. Normally, we would expect that part of the process to be quicker than the initial decision. So that's because normally you would be sending it to the same review. Often you would be sending it to the same reviewers who have already looked at the paper and written the report, and they would be looking through the comments. I wouldn't be able to give an exact date because peer review is a voluntary activity, and often people are tied up with work and away on field work or things like that that can slow down the process. We normally give, I think, 30 days to, it depends which journal it is. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 30 days to provide reviewer reports, and that would include resubmitted papers. So, and obviously some people will get back much more quickly than that if they are available like the next day. So I'm sorry, it doesn't help particularly, but if you look on the journal metrics, you can see the average across a whole year. So you can see how long it will take for a final decision to be made.
Thank you. Another question coming from Xiaochen. If my paper is accepted by a conference, the abstract will be published and the paper will be on the relevant website for different months. In this case, can I submit the paper to a journal as well?
Yes, I think, isn't that what we're talking about with conference
I think so,
papers?
yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to say it
make sure that it's referenced. Yeah, make sure it's listed as I presented this at X conference in the citations. Sorry, in the bibliography.
Yeah, and there is a related question. If you have any specific advice in turning a conference paper into a journal paper?
Well, it depends very much what subject it is, but for a scientific journal, there would normally need to be it would normally need to be restructured slightly, I imagine, because in a conference you're not going to be going through the methods and results and discussion and conclusion in quite the same manner. You will probably be giving more of an oversight of what you did without going into the individual data. And of course, you won't be saying all of the different people that you've read when you're talking at a conference. So you can't, so it will need to be restructured to fit the format of other papers in the journal. Yeah,
I guess it's pretty hard to give concrete advice without knowing what the paper talks about. But I mean, this is general advice.
If your conference paper is talking about a particular study that happened, then that particular study could be a great research paper, but it would need to be put into the format of a research paper.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Okay, we just received another question. Once our paper is accepted for publication, but still in the process of publishing, when submitting the abstract for the conference, do we need to make modifications in the abstract for the conference? Was it clear?
So when a paper has been accepted, so it's in production, I assume it's being typeset.
It's in the process. And I think this person wants to submit for a conference the abstract of this paper. Is asking like, do I need to make modifications in the
Good question.
abstract?
I think that will depend on the journal, as to whether they would want it to be changed. I mean, I think it would be okay normally to do the same abstract and say that this has been accepted for publication in a journal and say which journal it is, but it would definitely be worth checking the particular journal, and maybe just contacting the editor to see.
Yeah, double check, so make sure that you're not doing something you are not allowed. The journal would not be happy about.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So let me just invite if there's any other question or comment, and anyone wants to just talk quickly with Hani, we could make it happen. Otherwise, if there's no other question or comments, I think we're getting to the end of our webinar today. We had quite a few questions, and I hope we helped some of you connected out there to face the supervisors and yeah, gave some useful tips on how to make sure that you have your papers published in the best way. I don't see any other comment or question, Hani. But
okay. I would just like to, can I just say, I mean, all of these questions are really good and very common, so don't feel that you are asking something that nobody else is asking. Often people are facing the same problems and questions, so yeah, it's the information hopefully is available on our websites, but if not, then always just feel free to contact the journal editor, or if you have a contact like me at a publisher, then we're always happy to answer. It's better to check things first.
Thanks a lot, Hani. A very big thank you for your presentation and for staying with us with the Q&A session, and thanks, general thanks to Taylor and Francis for supporting and making this webinar possible. So I think we close it here. I'm just going to share my screen once again, just because I want to make sure that those who joined a little bit later and might not be in our WeChat group can join. It's going to take a moment for me to share my screen, but let's take the opportunity also to announce our next webinar next Wednesday. Halder, do you want to go and announce it?
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. Thank you so much, Anna, for the moderation today. Thank you so much, Hani, for your amazingly useful presentation. So next week, we will be doing an event with the German Academic Exchange Center here in Beijing, the DEAD. And we will be going back to our sort of science slam roots by talking about elevator pitches and how they are done. And the DAD is particularly good partner to work with to discuss something like this, because they do organize here in China the Falling Walls Labs, who are these 3-minute pitches events that they organize every year around the world and here in China. Well, they are organized around the world. Here in China, they are organized by the DAD. And it's going to be a really useful event. We're going to have amazing speakers and trainers with us. We are going to be joined by Corinna Luther, who's the head of the lab of the Falling Walls Foundation, as well as a Chinese colleague, Xu, who's the director of the SAP labs in China Digital School. So those two will be introducing to us sort of their insights when it comes to science communication. And then we just heard earlier, and I think it's safe to announce it because our colleagues at the DAD were just asking us to kind of update the information about the event. But there's a third speaker that just got announced. we have with us next week Emmy Tiendigo, who is the runner-up winner of the Falling Walls in Berlin last year, and like amazingly well respected science communicator. She is a published chemistry PhD candidate and from the University of Free State. And she has a profile features in Forbes Science and Sunday Times and a lot of different places. So we're talking about this very young early career scientist that have had this amazing success with science communication, and she's going to be sharing experience. So that's very exciting. Not only will we be joined by a couple of really great trainers, we will also have this testimony from a real practitioner of science communication. So that's really cool. And I know that all of you will be with us next week, but if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would be interested in something like this, you should definitely encourage them to join us and register as well.
Thanks a lot, Halder. It's great. I'm excited for next week as well. Having testimonies is always, I think, like just added value. It's going to be great. So see you all next Wednesday. Thanks a lot again, Hani, and have a good day. Have a good rest of the day, and have a good evening in China. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye bye.